Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Sacramento Storytelling Guild monthly story swap. We are here at the Sacramento Poetry Center. We want to give a thank you and a shout out to them for generously donating this space at no cost because they, as well as we, our goal is to increase literacy in the Sacramento area. So thank you very much to the Sacramento Poetry Center for providing this space. We are here both in person and on Zoom. So for those of you that are joining us on Zoom, welcome. And you can applaud by waving your hands or clapping your hands or pushing that little reaction button and making a hand show up on the screen or something else. I forgot what that was. Anyway, welcome. We are the Sacramento Storytelling Guild. My name is Mark Berry. I have been invited to be the MC today, and I'm honored to do so. And I am from Auburn, California, and I'm a member of the Foothill Storytelling Guild, which is up the hill a little ways. And we're likely to put on a winter storytelling festival. We put on 5 or 6 over the past years. We skipped a couple of years because of COVID, but if you'd like to find out more about that, just email anybody here and they'll pass it on to me. It's usually in January. And so any other, Sacramento Storytelling Guild. I want to thank everyone in the guild for making this possible, especially Joyce and Andy for working so hard all the time. We really appreciate you guys. And we have some stories for you. We have some wonderful storytellers. You will be taken to different parts of the world and different times in our history. And we also have a couple of very good poets that are going to be intermixed with our storytellers for you today. And we are going to start off with a fellow from Zoom who also lives up the hill a ways. We're going to start off with Dave Tarvin. Dave and I have been friends and storytellers for a number of years. He's a retired civil servant who loves storytelling, strong coffee, and odd little things. That's all he said. You'll have to ask him about that. And the title of Dave's story today is Stones. So, Dave Tarvin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Well, my name indeed is Dave Tarvin. Now, Tarvin is an old English name. There is actually a town in England about 150 miles from Liverpool, and that's named Tarvin. And that's where the first Tarvin came from England to America. And there's not a lot of us here, but there is a pretty big clan across the country. And as I was thinking about this story and thinking about my father, I thought about that. And I remembered a famous quote from the Gadsby. And it goes like this: families in America are always rising and falling. And I actually think about that quote pretty often, especially in reference to my father, because that's the absolute truth, you know. And my father, when I was a boy, he was rising. My father grew up very, very poor. I mean, unbelievably poor. He was the son of a sharecropper in Alabama who came out during those grapes of wrath days to California to pick oranges. And he got here when he was about 10 years old. But 10 years later, he was a pretty wealthy young man. My father was a bricklayer. That's how we started out. He learned a trade and he worked very, very hard, trying to reach that American dream. But the unique thing about my father is related to the American dream, because you see, the American dream evolved. It became the California dream. And when we think about the American dream, that's really what we're thinking about, because this was the California dream in the mid-50s to the mid-60s. A little tiny house that you could afford, a decent job that supported a wife and kids, a pool in the backyard, a patio, and a barbecue. My dad not only had that, but he was a huge part of that because he became a contractor and he wanted to amass wealth, and he was in the perfect place to do it, the San Fernando Valley in the late 50s, early 60s. It went through a great expansion and everybody was there and lots of people wanted to be there. The space industry was there. The motion picture industry was there. The aviation industry was there. So they had a huge middle class who all wanted homes, and my father was building them. He built the fireplaces. He built barbecues. He built stone water features around pools. And he worked 7 days a week to do that, so I didn't get to see him very much. But to compensate for that, he used to take me to work with him whenever he could. So I pretty much grew up on construction sites. By the time I was 8, my father actually owned quite a few businesses. He owned a gas station just because, but he had his contracting business. He owned a masonry supply yard, and he also owned an open pit mine up in Simi Valley next to some of the big movie ranches, where he would mine ornamental stone to use in his stonework and to sell. So I used to go with him often. And those were great times because we were stuck in the truck all the time. We had this old Chevy truck, and we were stuck for hours going from, San Fernando up into the Simi Valley. And we would work all day in the mine and we would come home. Sometimes he would tell me a story. So on this one particular day, it was a Sunday, and we had worked all day in the mountain loading up this truck. Now, it was a big 1-ton truck, and it had side rails going up the side so you could load in more stuff. I mean, this truck was loaded. And after this long day, we were driving home, and we were driving down some old highway. And we were about halfway home and in the middle of nowhere. And all of a sudden, boom, there was a big blowout, flat tire on the rear. My dad pulled over to the side of the road, dust goes everywhere, and we get out and look at the tire. Now the traffic was heavy. People are coming from Simi Valley, going back towards San Fernando and LA. Cars are whizzing by. It's hot. It was August, dusty, dirty. And there's that flat tire. My dad's staring at that flat tire. Without a word, he got into the back and he pulled out the spare tire and he pulled out all the stuff to change the tire. I looked at him and I said, "Dad, what are you doing?" He said, "We got to change this tire." I said, "How are we going to change that tire? It's loaded. Can't we call somebody? Can't we do something?" He said, "Yeah, we're going to do something. We're going to unload that truck and change the tire." I was not happy. I climbed up in the back of that truck and I would push those stones forward so that he could grab them and toss them out of the truck. I couldn't move all of them. Some of them were pretty big. It took us a long time to unload that truck. But soon it was unloaded. My dad jacked up that truck, changed the tire, and said, "Time for a break." And we climbed back into the cab of that truck just for a rest. He had 1 cup of cold stale coffee out of some old thermos and a half-eaten sandwich and a hard-boiled egg, and we split that and we just sat in that truck. We sat there. I turned to him and said, "I can't believe that you unloaded that whole truck. We're gonna have to load it up again, He just started laughing. He said, "It just is what it is." He said, "Dave, that reminds me when I was a boy in Alabama." He said, when I was a boy, probably not much older than you, there was a young man that was getting married in the little town that we lived in. And his dad was from the old country. Now, we don't know where the old country was, but we know he's from the old country. And when he was going to get married, the old man said, you have to go creeling. Now, nobody knew what that was. The old man had to explain it. He said, a creel. Well, you all know what a fishing creel is. Well, a creel just means a basket. And in the old country, they had big creels to carry all kinds of stuff. And so for this young man to go creeling, and this was a tradition, he had to put this big creel on his back. It was huge. And he had to walk through the town. And so he walked through the town. All the townspeople would come out and they would greet him and laugh and joke with him. And as he walked by, they would pick up rocks and stones out of their yard and they would put them into that creel as he walked through the town. And as he made a circle through the town and came to his fiance's door, he would walk up to the front of the house and he would stand right in front of the door. And she would come out. Now, if she came out and gave him a kiss, then he was done with his creeling. But if she rejected him, he'd have to make that trip again and again and again until she kissed him. And of course, as we were watching this old boy, his fiance came out, she didn't kiss him. So he had to make a second trip. The interesting thing was that as he was walking through the town, some people were pulling stones out. It looked like they were putting them in, but they were pulling them out with the other hand. And he made that second trip. And when he got to her house and he stood in front of that porch, she came running out, threw her arms around him and kissed him. And that was the seal of approval and the mark of that tradition from the old world. And after he told me that story, my dad looked deep into my eyes and he said, Dave, I think that's symbolic. It symbolizes the things that men must do. We have to carry big things with us. They are a burden, and we carry them around and around. He said, that's what we're doing today. They're just stones. Well, we finished up our stuff. We went out and we loaded that truck back up. It took seemed forever, but we got it loaded up. We drove home. And by the time we got home, it was late and Mom was upset. She had kept dinner in the ovens warm, she put it out on the dining room table and my father and I, we started eating and my mother came into the dining room. She started wagging that finger. She started lecturing my dad. You should have called me. You should have done this. You should have done that. I was worried. I thought she was really mad. And I was actually pretty nervous. She turned around, she walked out, and I looked at my dad thinking, oh my God, this is crazy. But he wasn't upset at all. And then I looked back at my mom and I realized, she had just been upset. She was worried. She loved my dad. And he turned to me and he looked at me again with that look deep into my eyes. He just had this big smile and he said, stones. Thank you.
Hey, Dave, good story. Well told. Thank you. And I love the story within a story. That's very special. So thank you, Dave Tarvin. Our next storyteller, you get to listen because you're not going to see him and he's not going to see you. You're not going to see him because he's coming in by telephone, and he's not going to see you because he happens to be blind. His name is Larry Crayson. We love him so much we call him Sir Lawrence, a name of honor. And today Sir Lawrence is going to tell us a story from the point of view of Fulton, and Fulton's going to be listening.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Larry has done quite a bit.
My name is Fulton Moth. I want to thank the Sacramento Storytellers Guild and Sir for allowing my father's story to be told today. I want to let you know that this is all my memory. And so, my father immigrated from China during the period of time when America did not welcome Chinese people. They could not own property. They couldn't bring their families over unless they had a business or had some way of support. And so my father was born in the early 1900s. He came over and stayed a year on Angel Island when he was about 10 or 11 years old. Earlier, before he was there, some of the older Chinese people had written on the walls the correct answers to the questions that immigration people would ask them so they could legally get into the country. My father learned this very well and watched very carefully what other people did as living, barbering, sawing wood, doing other kinds of labor. And so when my uncle, with his uncle, brought him to the United States, he stayed with him and they sailed up the Sacramento River on the Delta King to Walnut Grove, where his uncle left him in care of a family that he trusted, who were Chinese. My father went to school to learn basic English, basic how to work with money, and how to be a business person. He made it through third grade with limited English, and then he struck out cleaning homes, cleaning pool halls, churches, anything he could do. But he prided himself on being very prompt, very thorough in his cleaning, even though the people who hired him did not trust him and would test him when he was working. They'd be watching him, seeing how he would not steal things. Even one minister put some cash underneath some cushions on a couch and left the room. And when my father was cleaning the couch, he found the money underneath the cushion. Instead of putting it in his pocket, he carefully put it on the dining room table where the owner would know that he did not steal it. He put the cushions back where they belonged, and the minister came back and accused my father of stealing money since they were not underneath the cushion. In his broken English, his limited English, he convinced the minister that no, the money is on the table right there. And so he was tested over and over if he was trustworthy and very good worker. He got a reputation of being very good and prompt. And after a while, he got quite a clientele of people that he worked for. He earned money as best he could. Even though at the time the Chinese people could not own land, he could rent a piece of land and build a house on it. And so when he got of age, he had some of his friends who were good in carpentry build him a house on that land that he could not own. He also developed a room in the front of the house where he could eventually have a business, a barbershop. He even went up to Sacramento and got a license to be a barber. Then he looked around and found that a lot of the people that needed haircuts were Spanish speaking, Filipino speaking. And so even though he only knew Mandarin and a little bit of English, he mastered Spanish and Filipino. And most of his customers were then welcomed in his barbershop as Ming Ma Barbershop. He did shaving and haircut and used hot towels to soothe the face. And he became a very good, honest businessman. He worked long hours, sometimes 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. But there was something missing in his life. He realized he wanted to have a family. And so he had his license, he had his home, he went back to China to find a wife. And yes, in the area he used to live, he found a young lady who agreed to be his wife. And they had one girl child who was born in China there, who never came to America. After she was secured with other relatives, they moved back to the United States, to Walnut Grove, and then proceeded to have 5 more children. My mother worked in Thornton in a packing shed, working with fruits and vegetables, where my father worked in his barbershop. He told us kids to be honest, to be unkind, to not worry about people teasing you or making fun of you because you're Chinese. Yes, there was prejudice. Yes, there was possibility of beginning to fights. I struggled, even though I had poor eyesight, to learn what I could in school. My father pulled me aside sometimes and said, "Don't worry, Fulton, it will happen. Every one of my children will become really good workers and good citizens." We were really thankful that my father had the patience and the kindness to give us guidance in the strange land that we found ourselves in. Even though we were the minorities in Walnut Grove, we were appreciated. Eventually, my father worked and developed a good business. In 1985, or a little later, the family moved to San Jose, and my father became an American citizen. I am so proud of my dad because he overcame hardship, poverty, prejudice, and a whole new country to live in. I look up to my dad as a star to be really thankful that I am who I am, a wonderful citizen of this country. And thank you for hearing my father's story. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, Lawrence, good job. Good job. Thank you. Can you imagine being blind and putting all of those details and chronology together in your head? I think he's amazing. So thank you, Larry. And FYI, Larry and his wife, Mary Ellen, just celebrated their 44th wedding anniversary. Congratulations, Larry and Mary Ellen. Thank you for being with us today. Well, our next up person is one of our 2 poets. And as Diane starts her way up here, Diane Funston is our first poet. She has worked most of her life with adults and with developmental disabilities and with at-risk children in elementary schools. She is a gardener with a mini urban farm, and she says the biggest bloom in her life is her husband, Roger. So welcome, Diane.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Yes, I am kind of an urban gardener. I have a city lot in Marysville, and I plant almost everything on it. We've been there 6 years, and the only thing there when we moved in was a palm tree that was this high that's now way up there, and we put in a lot of fruit trees and vegetable beds and flowers and whatnot. So this is called Climbers. Pumpkin vines wind their way across yard. Springy tendrils cling to wrought iron fence around redbud tree. Corners of raised beds. Honeysuckle vines vine the arbor. Thick, woody. I'm going to have to take my glasses off because they're worthless for reading. Thick, woody feet tie strong leather laces. Yellow flowers bring bees, hummingbirds, seduced by sweet siren song scent. Jasmine wears white lace. I weave shoots over and under iron trellis as it climbs the ladder. Heady scent entices butterflies and other fairies. I live in a garden of very social climbers. And yes, most of my adult life, I worked with adults with developmental disabilities and kids at risk in school. This is about my first job, called First Job. Cream donut box, counter girl, 17, in at 6 a.m., out at noon. Old men order coffee, regular, fry cake, cruller, Apple fritter. Honey, sweetie, girly, give me a smile. You got a boyfriend? I never minded. Their retired eyes twinkled. The men would sit close on metal stools, drink coffee and refills, joke and laugh, trade workday memories when the factories ran round the clock all those years on the line. We counter girls gave them a smile, extra cream and sugar. Upgrade to a fritter on the house when the boss stepped out. Sure, Joe, your refill's coming. Nah, I'll wipe that spill up, Larry. Cup got in the way of your elbow, but it sure was a fun story. Sunday mornings, they came in with their wives, fresh from church. Dozen to go. No, honey, sweetie, girly. Their eyes downcast, wives handling the cash, their coats buttoned high. I love my first job, all but Sundays. And this is a more serious poem for those of us who live here in California. It's called Flammable. Smoke signals from miles away, strong scent of campfire everywhere, hazy, overcast, heavy air, unhealthy to breathe. Pine trees, those flammable Roman candles, lit by something, someone, deliberate, accidental, an act of miscalculated stupidity mixed with drought and wind, and conifers alight, leap from one to another, a mishappening ring of fire atop a foothill's birthday cake, and the old saying, we all fall down, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Dare they build again in an enchanted forest, lured by the dream of living wild, an authentic life in the woods, nature out the back door. But remember, fire makes nature stronger, cracks open pine cones that wouldn't germinate without that lick of flame. Animals scatter to lower ground, reassess instinct into strategy, unlike humans who rebuild over and over. And this is about one of my clients that I worked with. He was a young man in his 20s. When he was 15, he got into a car accident with two of his friends. He was the driver. His two friends were killed, and he was left as a quadriplegic. And this is called Strength. Austin sits with an unfiltered camel sucked to the bronze side of his sun-teased face. He looks out to the sea, the blue grace of ocean waves, rounded curves of waiting women, unaware of his lustful stare from behind his black sunglasses. He leans over the frame of his bright chrome wheelchair. Austin recalls the force of thrusting surf beneath his aged bodyboard that leans against a dry garage wall. He takes another deep drag, studies the arc of the incoming swell, raises one working arm to follow it, exclaims in slow, slurred speech, I have done that. He flexes his tanned right arm, hard with heavy muscle, from years of lifting free weights, following the surgery, after the accident, after the coma. Far now from the dune buggies and Harleys that still make him smile as he sifts memories. Austin rises to 6 feet 2 bulk, collapses the wheelchair in a single folding of his massive right hand. He lifts the chair to the car's trunk with 3 fingers of effort, lowering his shades to reveal graceful blue eyes while saying, I'll get that. You don't have my strength. And this is called The Nerve. My pickup was named Fiona, bright red, because my ex said I wouldn't have the nerve. The men at the dump oogled her, whistled, called her beautiful, built, stacked well, with the green waste I dropped off. They even helped when I unloaded my ex's golf clubs, called out, "Hey, darling, let me help you with that." Now Fiona lives out her days at my son's farm up north. We have downsized to one vehicle, a staid gold small SUV no one ever comments on. But back in the desert, the old dirt roads, ruts and washboards, in and out of the cab, collecting rocks on the dry lake bed, gravel spinning off those big tires. I left those dirt roads years ago, been on pavement ever since. I've never been afraid of red. My blood, my sex, my heart, an exclamation point on the road, spilled paint, roadkill, rose petals, the insides of the poet. And this last one is called Glass Exhibition for Dale Chihuly. For those of you who know Chihuly's wonderful glass work and the sea creatures he makes, and there's a chandelier at the Crocker Museum that's a Chihuly piece. Last night I dreamed in glass, stalactites and stalagmites of crystal, woven icicles streaming with light through displays of refraction within mirrored abundance. I saw a man blowing glass through flute-like tubes, a manic pan twisting molten hot ropes in serpentine spirals to slither or snap from the breath of his lips. Ex nihilo, the glass dances with his kiss. This artist Prometheus sparks skill from deft hands, while I watched intently such hard-packed ice melting down window panes, feeling a singe below skin from his unbridled flame. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane. My goodness. Thank you for taking my imagination to those different places with those different people. Isn't she quite a writer? Thank you, Diane Preston. Wow. Yeah, our next storyteller is right here in the room also. His name is Andrew Laufer, but you can also call him Papa Laufer. He's the president of the Sacramento Guild. He's our technical host. He's, you know, Mr. Tech guy and Mr. Put It All Together guy. And, you know, his family puts up with a lot because we demand a lot of Andy. And so much so that two of his children are actually here in the room today so they can see a little bit of him. He's recently published a book called Papa Laufer's Stories, Positive Reflections on Life in America. They're short stories, and I'm enjoying reading them a few at a time. You can see him on his very own YouTube channel, and can't say enough about love and appreciation of Andy Laufer, clean-shaven Andy Laufer. Here he is.
Thank you, Mark. I want to acknowledge my wife stepped into the room too, so my whole family's here today. And I'm just thrilled about that.
It's a special.
Thank you very much. So the title of the story is called Final Goodbye, and it is to honor my dad and my stepfather. Most guys have at least one man in their life who is important to them, and I'm really fortunate to have two. My dad was a great provider for the family, and that's not to say, you know, that's not a little thing, because I'm the youngest of 6 kids. He did a great job. He's a tough guy. He was a man's man. His career was in construction, and he had a kind of a narrow view of the world, but he taught me everything that he thought I needed to know to make it in life. And you know, he taught me things like how to put a worm on a hook and how to fix up my tackle to go fishing. It's great. He taught me things like how to build a doghouse, you know, important stuff. He taught me never to put my hands in my pocket when I'm on the job, because what do you do when your hands are in the pocket and you're on the job? You're doing nothing. And he knew that, especially in construction. We never do that. He taught me never to hit a woman, no matter what. He was a good man. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps and go into construction. But while I loved him and I appreciated him and respected him for what he did, and as sons often do, they don't always follow in their dad's footsteps. And I just didn't want to do that. Now, the last 3 months of his life were pretty rough. He had open heart surgery, and the surgery went great. His heart was just boom, 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 really going at it. But they laid him flat on his bed one day before he was ready, and he aspirated into his lungs, and he got aspiration pneumonia. So for 3 long months, he was struggling to breathe. And while he was living in Oregon, he was in an Oregon hospital. I was living here in Sacramento. I would go up and visit him every single weekend, talk about all kinds of things. And one day we brought up my son. My son was a newborn at the time. And he says, "Doggone it," he said, "I had it all figured out. I was going to take him hunting and fishing, teach him how to build a campfire." Man, I'm so upset. And, I guess it was at that moment that I realized that he realized he wasn't going to make it out of that hospital. So I told him to keep his chin up and keep fighting anyway. And then on another visit, it was like time for me to go. So I said, "Dad, I love you, and I'll see you next weekend." And he looks over his glasses at me. He goes, "You look good, Andy." Thanks, Dad. And those were the last words he spoke to me. The next time I went, sorry, he was asleep, and I watched him take his last breath. I was going to try not to do that today. Anyway, my stepdad, his name is Kent. Kent was the antithesis of my dad. Kent was a college-educated man. He encouraged me to go to college to broaden my perspective. And he really wanted me, he suggested basically that I pursue my own career, not something that most of the men in my family wanted to do. He was a kind and patient person. He taught me to be open-minded, which in that time of my life was really important for my emotional development. He was a world traveler. He saw all kinds of viewpoints all over the world, and he was more readily able to accept differences in opinion, far better than I would. And he taught me that as well. So him and my mom, while they taught me to respect where I came from, they also taught me to pursue my own desires, my own plans, and get a career that I wanted to do outside of construction. Kent died of cancer. He was in hospice, basically at my mom's house. So I went to see him a couple of weeks before he died, when he was still lucid. And I felt compelled to tell him that how important he was to me, that he was, and that I loved him. And when I told him that, he started to weep and cry, sob really. And he said, that he loved me too, and he loved my mom. He was so happy to be able to get with her and my sisters and to know me and my kids. And it was, we had never spoken like that together before. It was a wonderful moment. A lot of people don't have that opportunity to say their final goodbye to their loved ones. But I did, and it's a moment I cherish forever.
Thank you, Andy Lauber. Love. I'll follow that. Thank you for heartfelt. Thank you for touching. Thank you for sharing your incredible love with us. We could definitely feel it. That's Andy Laufer. And coming up next, we have another poet related to our last poet, believe it or not. He's coming up to the mic right now is Roger Funston. He's very pleased that Andy invited them to be with us today. Roger's a retired environmental scientist who studied and worked on 4 continents. He met the love of his life, Diane, at a poetry and music open mic in Tehachapi, California in 2008. So you never know what can happen at a place just like this. Roger?
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Andy, for inviting me. I have 4 poems. They're all stories at various points in my life. Since storytelling, I thought I would read story poems. And my first poem is a childhood memory. Penny candy. 11 cents in hand, my eyes scan the penny candy behind the counter, deciding, bazooka gum, atomic fireball, Turkish taffy, red licorice, hot tamale, Tootsie Roll, bit of honey, dots on paper, Mexican hats, malted milk ball, candy cigarette. Phew. I hand my money to the gray-haired man behind the counter. He smiles patiently, puts my selections in a brown paper bag, one in a long line of boys that day in 1966. Herbie's Hot Nuts on West Pico Boulevard in West LA, a small neighborhood store that also sold nuts, ice cream, and frozen bananas on a stick. Dipped in a container of liquid chocolate, then rolled in sprinkles or nuts before the chocolate hardened. At first, a cold sensation biting into it, but easier to chew it down as it warmed. When I got my driver's license, my younger sister would say, "Raji, frozen bananas, Herbie's," and we would drive to the shop. My sister always got her banana with nuts. Mine was always chocolate sprinkles. Not too long afterwards, Herbie's was gone. Herbie undoubtedly sold out, retired, the real estate too valuable, now wall-to-wall commercial buildings. Further east on Westwood Boulevard, Pickwick Theater. Saw many movies there. Pickwick bowling, bowled with my father, one of the few occasions we did things together. Across the street, Junior's, iconic Jewish delicatessen, incredible deli takeout case, rare roast beef, lean corned beef, pastrami, cream cheese, Swiss cheese, chopped liver, coleslaw, top of the line Nova lox, whitefish, fantastic bakery with rye and challah, sliced to order, pies, cakes, Jewish pastry to die for. Pickwick is long gone, became West Side Pavilion, 74-store mall that later cratered, now high-end apartment buildings. Junior's also gone. I rarely think about these days 50 years later, my adult life a winding road of suburbia, rural remoteness, eastern Wyoming, Seal Beach, Bakersfield, Mojave Desert, high elevation central Nevada, and now the agricultural Sacramento Valley. Orchards, rice fields flooded in fall, winter home to millions of migrating waterfowl, Central Valley Flyway. Bullock's department store, Newberry's Five and Dime, Oakley's Barbershop, Ship's Restaurant, Label's Table Delicatessen, long gone, and eating authentic Jewish delicatessen food, if I could find it locally, would probably kill me. But penny candy and frozen bananas, sweet memories. So in the 90s, I worked in the oil fields in Kern County, and this is a poem about that. The White Elephant restaurant is gone. I drive across a sea of pumping oil wells to the district office, closer to life's realities where the real work is done. Once or twice a month, I visit with James and Leroy until it is time for lunch. Then we head to the White Elephant restaurant, the social hub of Taft. Nothing in this place seemed to change except for the daily special. Just another coffee shop with fake leather booths, a bar in the back with dance floor, country music, beer, good times. But when I sat in this place, I could feel the tension draining out of me. Everyone knew everyone's business. If you wanted to know about drilling results from the rig working on the next lease, you waited for the company man to leave, then swabbed the contractor for information. Leroy, then in his 60s, had worked in the oil field since his teens, always with another incredible fish story, sometimes about fishing. Later forced to retire after an oil company merger. James called Taft Mayberry RFD. He would leave his keys in his pickup bed. I watched James' life unfold at the White Elephant, the breakup of his marriage, flirting with the waitress who he eventually married, taking pride in ownership and running his leases. After the merger, he became another cog in the wheel. White Elephant days were good times. when crazy wildcatters still ran the small oil companies, when employees were treated like family, the time of handshake deals before the lawyers and 100-page contracts, before all the big fish gobbled up the little fish. Years later, I returned to Taft to rummage through the pieces of my past in search of what I thought I had lost. I looked for the place along Central Avenue, but the White Elephant restaurant is gone. Fortunately, the people are still around, a sweet day of reminiscing, for some the good old days recalled, for others a new life with better days ahead and a past not lost. Thank you. So in the early 2000s, I worked out in the Mojave Desert at a US 4X at a mining operation. And I had, because it was a long ride, about an hour from Tehachapi, I had XM radio on 70s. And so there were some song lyrics that got incorporated into this poem. So see if you can figure out what they are. Pieces of a dream. Greeted by brilliant orange horizon, isolated patches of twinkling Mojave lights, scattered across endless desert vistas, filled with Joshua tree sentinels, harsh outlines of blackened bluffs visible above carpet of fog, fall freeze chills desiccated soil, promise of hydrating rains at hand. Pushing my head back into headrest, wishing I could take off, fly to an exotic destination, pressing on the accelerator, feeling the exhilaration of speed. Well, now, would he have wings to fly? Would he be free, golden wings against the sky? As daylight takes over night, cold and fog remain, but I am warmed by the memories of you. When she wraps her loving arms around me, about drives me out of my mind. Yeah, when my baby kisses me, chills run up and down my spine. Familiar trek, parking lot to office, constant industry hum, being careful to stay within crosswalk lines. Opening my office door, the chill engulfs me. Same bare white walls, only sound, heat passing through vents. Sitting back in my chair at my good old desk, a few moments of quiet before the daily drill begins. An eternity ago, we were told we could change the world. Now meetings, monotony, politics, posturing, slowly wearing down from the intensity. Great work crowded out by trivia, someone else's priority. Sometimes I want to scream, don't ask me what I think of you. I might not give the answer you want me to. Finally able to escape, retracing morning drive, my spirit soars as Tehachapi Mountains come into view, soft lighting of day's end and rolling hills, so different than the dazzling brilliance and harshness of desert dawn. Fall colors linger under snow-capped peaks, white wispy clouds streak across the sky, pink tinged from sunset's glow. Waking up next to you, lazy weekend mornings, house full of dogs, warmed by roaring fire, soaking in the hot tub, soft melody of wind chimes moved by gentle breezes, dark shadows confined to television, pieces of a dream. Thank you. My last poem was a more recent memory. I do a lot of hiking in the Sierras, and this is a poem about that. Snow piled high, bundled in heavy coat, ski hat, gloves, crunching sound as I walk, snow-packed road to Echo Lakes, pine tree branches laden with snow, lone snowmen in forest clearing. I wonder who took the time to make that snowman. Was it someone working alone in the cold? Why did they build it here? How soon will it melt as the weather warms during the day? Did they love being alone, exercising in the snowy forest as much as I do? High Sierra Echo Lakes, rustic resort, now in winter hibernation. Lower Echo Lake frozen over with snow cover, almost blinding whiteness. Marina building, roof barely visible above banks of snow. Snow drifts up to cabin rafters. Fond memories of pleasant summers spent at Echo Summit Lodge. Out the door while others still discussing where to hike. I love hiking alone, taking in the sights, sounds, smells. No forced marches or waiting on others. Pacific Crest Trail runs through the north side of Lower Echo Lake into desolation wilderness. Glacially carved High Sierra, the trailhead easily accessed by summertime boat taxi. I've taken this boat ride to the trailhead in summer. The trail is steep, rocky, lots of high step-ups, quickly passed by young people with young knees. A beautiful stark landscape, but treeless. My knee starts aching before I get to Lake Aloha. Turn back, but still a good hike. Warming on the walk back, first the hat comes off, then the gloves, unzip the coat, crunch, crunch, crunch. Love playing in the snow, living in the snow another matter. Fallen snow quickly turns to ice slush. I would be happy to never shovel snow again. Heading home just ahead of the next storm, snowflakes turn to heavy rain as I descend, rocky slopes and glacially carved valley to green forest. Rainfall lightens, then no rain. Enter the flatlands, greeted by tens of thousands of ducks, geese, swan, wintering on flooded rice fields, back in my snowless world. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you for painting those beautiful pictures. And on a day like today, I don't know if it's as warm where you guys are on Zoom, but it's warm here. And I really appreciated that snowscape and the crunching on the eye. Oh, doesn't that sound wonderful today? And I noticed that some of your memories, like some of my memories, also include favorite foods and restaurants. So it's good to meet you today, Roger. Our next poet comes to us via Zoom from the East Coast, from the state of Maine. Well, he normally lives here, but he's over in the state of Maine right now visiting his grandsons. And from now on, he'll be able to say that he's told stories from coast to coast. Here's John Petrick.
Thank you, Mark. Honor thy father. Well, that Old Testament commandment's probably pretty easy to follow if you have one of those dads who teaches you how to throw the baseball and how to fish and how to build your treehouse in the backyard. But what if your dad is the most cruel, most evil, most feared, most hated man in the universe? Well, that's me. My dad is Darth Vader. Well, we all know that Darth Vader wasn't always evil, right? Before he went over to the dark side, he was a honored and respected Jedi Knight named Anakin Skywalker. Many people thought he was chosen one. And before he married into Jedi royalty and had his children, Luke and Princess Leia, he had a little fling with the barmaid who happened to be my mother. Well, until recently, I didn't know about my father. I didn't know anything about him, the good side or the evil side. You see, in order to avoid scandal, the Jedi hid my mother and I in the most remote place that they could find, on a planet called Earth, on a farm in a place called South Dakota. And my mother, she got a job as a housekeeper for this handsome young farmer named Albert. And I grew up on that farm. Well, I found out later that the Jedi continued to monitor me until I was about 8 or 9. But when I showed no skills for lightsaber fighting or flying fighters through canyons and under bridges at high speeds, or leading the forces of good against the forces of evil and other Jedi skills, why, I was kind of forgotten. And my mom, she ended up marrying this Albert, and they had a bunch of kids of their own. And Albert raised me as his own son. And he was a pretty good dad, kind of a crusty old fart, and oftentimes we didn't get along, but he always had the best interests of his kids at heart. And my real dad, I guess he was just awfully busy raising Luke and Princess Leia and fighting good against evil. And so maybe I can't blame him for forgetting me. But what I can't understand is how he became the greatest traitor in the history of the universe when he went over from the Jedi to the dark side of the evil empire. But I suppose that occupied a lot of his time and effort too. So anyway, I just got raised as an American farm kid. Didn't know anything about Vader or Skywalker or the existential battle between good and evil. Why, in my little town, good was our local high school basketball team, and evil was our hated rivals down the road, the Wakanda Warriors. Well, Albert did his best, but I had no talent for farming either. Raising crops, fixing machinery, that was just a mystery to me. So like a lot of people who have no practical skills, I became a lawyer. And I have to say, I was a pretty darn good lawyer. I built my practice and reputation, gradually gaining bigger and more complicated cases and bigger and better clients and making a really good living. And I got married and had kids of my own, and I was pretty well set. And then one day, I got a call from some orphans from the planet Alderaan. While they had been away on a field trip, their families, their parents, their homes, their entire planet had been destroyed by the evil empire. And they wanted to hire me to get justice. This was my big case. This was going to be the capstone of my career. The media, the press from all over the universe covered this case. Well, after years, the usual years of legal maneuvering, the case finally gets to trial. And Darth Vader is the key witness. If I can get Darth Vader to concede, we will win the case. And the courtroom security, they took away all of Darth Vader's weapons, all of his shields. So when he got to the stand on about the 10th day of the trial, he had no protections. It was just him against me, mano a mano. And he was the most fierce and ferocious witness that I had ever encountered. Every question, every answer was a battle. But like any good cross-examination, I got him to admit a few of the small points. And then he had to agree with me on a few others. And I built until it was time to approach the witness stand with the ultimate question. Mr. Vader, you have admitted that you control all of the activities of the evil empire. You have admitted that the evil empire had the motivation and the capacity to destroy the planet Alderaan. You have admitted, and other witnesses have testified, that the starships of the evil empire were surrounding the planet Alderaan, and no other force could penetrate their airspace. So tell me, Mr. Vader, how could anyone else other than the evil empire be responsible for the destruction of the planet Alderaan? I smirked at the jury. Why, you little son of a... He took his helmet off and he slammed it against the floor. The whole courtroom gasped. Darth Vader looked just like me. The same round, balding head, same crooked teeth, the same moles on the side of his mouth, even the same glasses. No wonder he wore a helmet all the time. Well, flabbergasted, I lost my train of thought, all my questions. I just said, "You look like me." He sat down and he stared at me with a stare that penetrated my very bones. "Are you from South Dakota?" Confused, I nodded yes. Then I think I am your father. He sobbed. I sobbed. We hugged and sobbed each other. Other lawyer jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. I move for a mistrial. The judge slammed down the gavel. Granted. And so I lost the case. It shattered my reputation and my career. But I found my father. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Very good story. Very well told. I've seen you progress, John, and that was really good, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your visit there in Maine with your grandsons. And until we see you back on this side of the coast to coast storytelling tour that you're on, we have another teller and a very good teller. And we also have some minutes. And we were gonna, it was thought to be a surprise at the end, but since it's already been mentioned, I would like now for the Loffer family, if you wouldn't mind stepping up, please come up here. And Papa Loffer, come join, and we'll have your son and daughter lead us in a very appropriate song right now.
Come on, you can come on.
Oh, yeah, you're getting up here too.
They tell me you're the singer in the family, so.
Right.
What?
All right. And happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Dad. Happy birthday to you. She thought we were shy.
Thank
No?
you, guys. Yeah, right.
Yeah, we're spawned.
Yeah. Until I had to drag him up here physically, right? So the ham doesn't fall far from the tree. No offense, Papa Loffer. So
Whenever everybody has fun, don't set the card back there. Yeah.
for those of you that aren't on Zoom, those of you here in the room, those of you on Zoom, we know that you're applauding and laughing with us and wishing Annie the very happiest of birthdays. But you don't get any cake, as Julie said. So here we have a card that we can all please sign the card before you leave and enjoy cake and refreshments and lots of good things. Does anybody have a story they're itching to tell since we've got a few minutes? Right now, unrehearsed and unscheduled? Well, I'll tell a short one. I've become friends with the Tibetan Buddhist monks who travel here every year or two as they can get their passports from where they live in exile in India. And one of my monk friends told me about a young man monk, and I thought I'd share this story with you. He's a young adult monk studying all his life in the monastery and the monastic university there, where they live in exile in India. The Tibetan Buddhist monks don't have their home country anymore since the Chinese invaded and took it over back in the late 1950s. So they live in exile in a place in India where there weren't any people, so they could have some space. Well, you know how, sorry about that, you know how populous India is. So you can imagine the space that they were able to give loan to the monks is not a very inhabitable space. It's jungle, actually. So these days, if you want to go from the barracks to the university to the temple, what you do is you walk through a jungle-like terrain. This young monk was having the hardest time staying in the present moment. And as you may know, Buddhism is a religious theological philosophy, and being present in this present moment is a very admirable role of theirs. And this young monk, with all of his teachers and all of his lessons studying for years, was still really having a problem staying present in this moment. One day he was walking from one building to another through the jungle-like atmosphere there, and out of the corner of his peripheral vision, he noticed something kind of shadowing him. And as he allowed a little more of his peripheral attention to notice, he noticed that it was a tiger, just a few leaves and bushes over there. And the tiger was pacing the pace of the monk as he was walking, and the monk upped his pace and started walking a little more fast. And as he walked a little faster, he noticed that the tiger was also walking a little faster. And pretty soon the monk was jogging, and so was the tiger. And pretty soon the monk was running, and so was the tiger. And the monk ran as fast as he could. He was just a blur of robes flashing through this jungle as fast as he could, so fast that he didn't realize he'd come to the edge, and there was a cliff. And just like you've seen in those animated cartoons, he was still running when he ran out of real estate. And now he's going down, and his arms are flailing, and the sleeve of his monk robe caught on a little snag of a branch that was sticking out from the cliff. And there he was, suspended. And he looked up and saw that tiger up there. You could see the toenails and the nose, and that tiger looked like he was still pretty hungry. Then he heard something, and he looked down, and there was a mountain lion or puma or whatever they call them over there. He looked mighty hungry too. But just then, the monk spotted in the face of the cliff a little notch in the face of the cliff, and there in the notch were growing some wild strawberries. And he looked, and he picked the reddest, the ripest, the most succulent looking of those wild strawberries, and he plopped it into his mouth and said, That's the story of the monk and the strawberry. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now a very special person dear to my heart is BZ Smith. BZ is one of California's first professional storytellers. She started nearly 50 years ago, and she's a driving force of the Motherlode Storytelling Guild. We're here in Sacramento. I'm from the foothills. BZ's from the Motherlode, and also, working very well with the state, the Storytelling Association of California, and the national network. These days, her work focuses on reviving tales of her own indigenous indigenous roots, if my teeth work, as a member of the Wendat of the Wyandot Nation. BZ lives near Yosemite with her musician husband, 2 brilliant grandchildren scholars, and a quartet of cats. BZ, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark. Very, very fun. And by the way, just want a quick, big thank you to Terry Chekon, who's in the office, who in the audience, who was an integral part of those early days of my storytelling career, and was gracious enough to have myself and the 2 people I performed with back then travel all over the Sacramento area for probably about 3 years. And she really, really gave us a wonderful opportunity to see our career as professional storytellers grow. So once again, Terry, thank you for all that support, especially in those very early years of those events. I'm honored to be here with you today. But before I begin, as Mark mentioned, I live near Yosemite, and I want to acknowledge the people who lived in Yosemite and in the Central Sierra for 10,000 years, the people who were the guardians and the caretakers of this land where we live today, the Central Sierra Miwok. I acknowledge their grace and their kindness and the ways that they now prosper here in our own community. I'm very grateful for their support. The story I'm going to tell you takes place in Central Texas, and the people in the story were the first settlers in this particular part of Texas. And so in fact, on one side of my family, I am Native American, a member of Wyandot Nation. On the other side of my family, on my father's side, my father's family were the settlers who stole the land from the Comanche people in the early days of the Texas Republic. So I share that with you simply to acknowledge this important part of our American history and how all of our lives intersect in every possible corner. But now I'm going to take you to 1930 on a cotton farm in Central Texas. An 8-year-old boy hears the old rooster crowing out in the yard, and all of a sudden he plops his feet on the floor and he dashes down the stairs and rushes out across the yard into the barn. And once he's in the barn, he tends the chickens, slops the pigs, tends the mules, gathers up the eggs, and then rushes on back into the house where Mama already has breakfast ready. Sitting at the table are his siblings, his older brother Billy, his little brother and best friend Nelson, and little baby Nan, barely walking. They all have a yummy breakfast, and then the 3 boys take off for school. Daddy Bunk's already out working in the fields, and the day begins. Yes, my daddy was born on that farm. His daddy was born on that farm. His daddy's daddy was born on that farm, and his daddy's daddy's daddy was born on that farm, and all of them were farmers. My dad, he wasn't so sure that he wanted to be a farmer. He was sure that there was something else out there that he wanted. He had 2 great passions. One of them was reading, and his other passion was seeking adventure. But he lived on this farm in Texas. How much adventure could he have? Every day after school, he came home and he hooked up those mules to the plow and he took off across the fields in the springtime. And sure enough, he would spend his afternoons looking at mule butts, Blackjack and Buster. And when Buddy would look out at that, he would say to himself, well, this is a view I do not quite appreciate. I don't want to be a farmer. I want to be an adventurer. Every Saturday, Grandma and Grandpa Smith would stop by, get Daddy Bunk's car, load the kids into that Model T Ford, and they would drive into the big town of Cleburne, Texas. There, it was about a 10-mile drive down dusty, dusty roads. And when they got into Cleburne, Grandpa Smith would pass out some pennies here and there, and 3 of the children would take off like jackrabbits racing to go to the penny candy store. But Buddy, that was that boy's name, Buddy, he would fly to the library, and there he would get a great big stack of books, week after week after week. He had so many adventures in those books. In fact, one time when he got home, he took some baling wire and he made a contraption that fit around his shoulders, and he made it so it could prop up and he could put a book right there in front of him. So while he was plowing, he was able to read, turning the pages, and then he would be on adventures on the Pequot, chasing Moby Dick, in a balloon, flying all around the world, in a cave, exploring and finding paintings on the cave walls, in the pyramids of Egypt, one adventure after another, even going to the Serengeti Plain to see the beautiful animals, especially those immense elephants. Now, one Saturday on that same trip, when summer had come on, Buddy was running over to the library when something caught his eye. It was a colorful poster. It had a tiger on it. It had a woman swinging on a trapeze in it. It was a poster for a P.T. Barnum Ringling Brothers Circus that was coming to the town of Cleburne. Buddy was so excited. He thought to himself, a circus here? Oh, that means there'll be lions and tigers and bears and elephants. Buddy had to go to that circus. But he knew Daddy Bunk and Mama Madia couldn't afford a ticket for one boy, let alone 4 children. But Buddy, he was a planner, and he read that poster carefully. He asked around town before they headed back home, and he found out exactly when that circus was going to be pulling into town, and he was ready. On that very night, Buddy lay in bed quietly. And when he knew everyone was asleep, he pushed his covers back. He hopped out quietly from bed, all dressed and ready to go. He tiptoed across the room to where little Nelson slept, and he shook him. Nelson, wake up. 6-year-old Nelson rubbed his eyes. He looked at his brother and he said, Buddy, what are you doing waking me up in the middle of the night? Buddy said, do you want to go to see those elephants? And Nelson looked at him. He says, Buddy, we can't be doing that. It's pitch black out there, and besides, way too far to walk. And even in the dark of the night, Nelson could see a glimmer and a gleam in Buddy's eyes, as Buddy said, "Who said anything about walking?" And that's all Nelson had to hear. He slipped out of bed, threw his clothes on, and those two little boys quietly tiptoed down the stairs and scurried across the yard into the barn. They opened up the big back doors of the barn, and then together, those two little grunts, they pushed that Model T Ford down the road just as far as they possibly could. And then Buddy went to the front of it. He gave it a 1, 2, 3, 4 crank. The engine roared to life. Buddy jumped in. Nelson got down on the floor, and Buddy steered that car while Nelson was down on the floor working the pedals. Off they went 10 miles into town, the dust flying everywhere. And it wasn't long before they pulled right into the Cleburne train station. There was an eerie mixed up glow of lamplight and moonlight, all illuminating little whirlwinds of dust, little divots of dust that were flying all about from that Texas dirt. And there the boys saw that all sorts of people from Cleburne had come out. Cars were parked all along the railroad track, and they all had their headlights shining, so that track was glimmering in the night. The boys managed to get that car right up with the rest of them, and they made sure they kept their headlights on. And right about then, they heard it. They could feel a rumble in the ground, and then they heard it again. Toot, toot, toot. Here came the train. It was roaring and rumbling, and then there was the screech of the brakes as it pulled into the station, and then a huge cloud of steam covered the whole train. Those boys, they just stared and stared, trying to see every inch of it, every ounce of it, every microsecond of it. And then the first to hop off the train, well, those were the roustabouts. And the very first thing that the roustabouts unloaded were those elephants. The big, gigantic beasts came walking down the wooden planks, landing on the ground, stomping their feet on real ground for the first time in so many miles. And then that's when Nelson did it. He said, "Oh, Buddy, would you look at that? Those elephants. They are bigger than our bull." "Yep," said Buddy, "they sure are bigger than the bull. And look at those legs. They're as big as tree trunks, just like I read in a book. And they stand as tall as 2 mules stacked on top of each other." Now the roustabouts went to work, and together they all teamed up, hand over hand, unloading big, huge bundles from that train and piling them onto the back of the elephants, getting great big, long, large poles that they balanced on the backs of the elephants. And now the next thing to happen, what happened? They started running down Main Street in Cleburne, Texas. Everybody from the town who had come out came running along with them, cheering and clapping. It was an elephant parade in the middle of the night, and leading the whole pack were 2 little boys, their faces smiling so big they lit up the night. On and on they went down the road until they came to an empty field that a farmer had offered to the circus. And now those roustabouts and those elephants, they started working together as they set the poles and yanked them up, as they got the fabric covered up over everything, that big gigantic canvas tent, and suddenly ropes pulling, yanking, hammers banging, when all at once, pop, up it went. The big top was ready to go, and now they were anchoring down the ropes to make sure that it stayed secure. In that moment, Buddy said to himself, "Yes, magic. It is real. Magic is real. I never believed I'd see such a sight, and here I am." And right about that same moment, Buddy looked towards the east, and he could see a little sliver of rosy light coming on that straight horizon. And so quickly he snapped back into the real world and he turned to little Nelson and he said, we better get on home before Daddy Bunk wakes up. Now the boys ran back as fast as they could, hurrying back to Daddy Bunk's Model T. And when they got there, it wouldn't start. No matter how hard Buddy tried to turn that crank, it just wasn't going to go. And they didn't know what was going to happen or what they were going to do. And suddenly they both felt someone staring at the back of their heads. They turned, and there was a big, tall man. He had a broad Stetson hat. He was wearing hand-stitched Tony Lama boots, pearl-handled pistols at his side, and a big silver star pinned to his shirt. The sheriff. His steely blue eyes got all squinty like little slits. And he looked at those two boys and he said, are you Bunk Smith's boys? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, we are. That's your daddy's car? Yes, sir. Yes, it is. You come out here to see these elephants? Yes, sir. Yes, we did. Oh, Daddy, know you're here? No, sir. No, we don't. Now, Buddy watched. As that sheriff wiped his nose, as that sheriff reached out. Buddy was sure he was going to grab those pistols when all at once the sheriff said, come on now, boys, you jump inside that car. I'm going to give you a crank and you're going to get home before Daddy Bunk wakes up. And so the sheriff went 1, 2, 3. It rolled to life. And those two little boys, they just kept on heading home as fast as they could go, hoping they would get there before the rooster crowed. Nelson on the floor working those pedals and Buddy steering the car the whole way down those dusty, dusty roads. Wasn't too long. Well, it really was a long time, but it seemed to go pretty quickly because they were so excited. They pushed that barn into the back, and they pushed that car into the back of the barn, shut those doors, and then as quietly as they could, they hurried across the yard. They tiptoed up those stairs and put their heads on their pillows. And when Buddy's head hit that pillow, he said to himself, I am an outlaw. And that is the first of many an adventure for that fella, Buddy, who became my own daddy. But the other adventures, those are for another time when we all get together to tell stories that will honor fathers. And thank you so much for letting me share that one. Thank you.
And thank you for the stories honoring fathers. It is June. It is still Father's Day month. And yes, thank you for everything. It's time for us to wrap it up. We're just a few minutes early, but I don't think anybody will object to that. Does anybody have an announcement or anything before we sign off the air? Come and see us next month on the 4th Friday. Come see the website to get the updates. There's a chance that we're going to switch to the 3rd Saturday instead of the 4th Saturday of the month. So stay tuned. Stay well informed. Okay? We're going to chat amongst ourselves.
So for you guys on Zoom right now, basically I'm going to mute us and I'll turn the camera around so you can see the crowd, but you guys can stay on and chat with each other if you'd like. Thank you so much for participating in this program. It was a very fun program to have. The poetry was amazing. And the storytelling was great, except for that crybaby in the middle. But otherwise, anyway, good to see you guys.
What is the thing?
Thank you, BZ.
I don't know.
That was amazing. Well told. Great way to wrap it up. So we appreciate you. Good story.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and great stories from everybody. I
Yes.
loved it. The poems were wonderful too. Pretty marvelous. Thank you.
Yes, it's such a great addition having poets
Yeah,
with our group. I really enjoy that.
I like that too.
And BZ, your pictures are just so perfect. They're kind of dirty. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. I'm glad you like
Very
that.
good. Okay.
And John, your imagination is Fantastic. I love that story.
Marvelous. I loved
And I
that.
like the view out your window.
Yeah, really, that's gorgeous. No, that was a great story, John. Thank you so much. I'm a big Star Wars fan, so it's like, oh, this is so cool. It's taking me back. It was very, very fun. Thank you for that. And Dave, your story was marvelous too. I really loved it. I grew up in the LA area for a good chunk of my childhood, so that was a nice visit back
Okay,
that place and time. So thank you.
Beezy,
Yes.
turn that story into a picture book.
Oh, thank
It's an
you.
illustrator's dream.
Okay.
Imagine, to draw the car and the elephants from the point of view of the. I think you should.
Supposedly it's a true story, according to my dad and my aunt Ann. So,
Great story, well told.
thank you, thank you. I don't know if the